Welcome everyone to today's presentation. My name is Dr. Silkman, and today I'm going to be talking about a very controversial topic entitled Teresa Halbach's Toyota RAV4. It's all about the blood. And today I'd like to investigate the following questions. Firstly, was Steven Avery's right middle finger actively bleeding on Monday, the 31st of October 2005? What did Brendan Dassey tell investigators Fassbender and Wiegert about the cut on Steven Avery's finger? We'll be having a look at the forensic analysis of the blood that was found in Teresa Halbach's Toyota's RAV4, as well as Steven Avery's Pontiac Grand Am. And finally, how did Steven Avery's blood get inside the Toyota RAV4? And we'll be looking at the state versus the defense. Okay, but it's important to initially establish a chronology of events. And we're looking at Steven Avery's version versus the state. Now we know that on Monday, October the 31st, 2005, Teresa Halbach was at the Avery salvage yard between 2:30 and 2:45 p.m. and she was there to photograph a minivan for Barb Yunder. After the photo shoot, Steven had paid Teresa and he saw her leave the Avery salvage yard. And according to Steven, Teresa had stayed for about 5 minutes. However, if we contrast this, the state attests that Teresa and her Toyota RAV4 never left the Avery salvage yard, and in fact, she was murdered by both Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey. Now, on the Saturday of November the 5th, 2005, Pam and Nicole Sturm, they find Teresa's Toyota RAV4 in the Avery salvage yard at about 10:20 in the morning. They found that all the doors were locked and the number plates were missing. No one, including law enforcement officers, some of whom had torches with them, had noted any signs of blood on or in the vehicle. Now, Steven Avery's blood was found in Teresa's Toyota RAV4, and the forensic analysis of the Toyota RAV4 was done by Ertel, Groffey, Colhane, Stalkey and Riddle, and this was done on November the 6th and the 7th. The actual Toyota RAV4 was processed at the Madison Crime Laboratory, and we can see here images showing various blood stains within the RAV4. Now, Colhane had obtained items A6, A7, A8, A9, A10 and A12, and all of these were question stains or reddish brown crusts that were recovered as swabs from the inside of the Toyota RAV4, and Colhane had found that these particular items contained the full genomic DNA profile from Steven Avery, and you can check this in Exhibit 311. Now, Steven Avery underwent a physical examination, and Sergeant Tyson was questioned about this in the Brendan Dassey trial. Question: and during that physical examination, did you note any specific injury or remnants of an injury at that time? Answer: yes, it was his middle finger on the right hand. He had a deep laceration, and that laceration was photographed on Wednesday the 9th of November 2005. And the question I would like to ask is a simple one. Was Stephen Avery's middle finger actively bleeding on Monday, the 31st of October 2005? Remember, that's the day that Teresa Halbach had disappeared. Alright, now, Special Prosecutor Kratz, during the Brendan Dassey trial, stated the following. I quote, "I told you before about the cut, the actively bleeding cut on Stephen Avery on the 9th. We will show you pictures of the remnants of that cut. It was healing, but just how deep that cut was, and you can draw the conclusions, and in fact, it may or may not even be contested that his finger was actively bleeding on the 31st, when he struggled with Teresa, and when he loaded her in the back of the vehicle, and helped and dispose of the vehicle to conceal that particular crime." So, in essence, Ken Kratz had speculated that Stephen Avery had an active bleeding finger on the 31st of October 2005. Now, let's have a look at Stephen Avery's blood in the Toyota RAV4. And here is an example of a blood spot that was found right next to the ignition. And this was given the title Item A8. Now, according to the state is presenting the case that Stephen had an actively bleeding finger, and the blood that we see in the Toyota RAV4 was from an actively bleeding finger. In contrast to this, the defense was saying, no, the blood that was present in Teresa's Toyota RAV4 was planted, and it was planted using blood from the Stephen Avery 1996 blood vial. Now notice, this particular vial has a purple top, and it contains EDTA, which is an anticoagulant. So we have two opposing theories on how the Stephen Avery's blood was present in the Toyota RAV4. Now, here's an important question. Did anyone actually see Stephen Avery's actively bleeding finger on that Monday, the 31st of October? So let's examine Brendan Dassey and the fateful events that transpired on the Monday, October the 31st. Here is a photograph of both Brendan and Stephen at Crivets. And we can ask, what did Brendan tell investigators Fassbender and Wiegert about the cut to Stephen Avery's finger? And it's important to note that Brendan was not called up to testify in the Stephen Avery trial. Now, why is Brendan Dassey so important? Well, he himself was later sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder, second-degree sexual assault, mutilation of a corpse, and remember, there was no forensic evidence against Brendan Dassey. And of course, his alleged victim was Teresa Halbach. Alright, now in order to investigate this, we need to have a look at the CASO documents where Brendan was interrogated. Let's have a look at the first one that took place on February the 27th, 2006. I quote, "Wiegert, did you see any blood on him at all?" Brendan, no response. Fassbender, was he hurt? Brendan, no response. Fassbender, did you see any abrasions at all? Bandage up at all anywhere? Did he tell you that he hurt himself or she hurt him? Brendan, he said he cut his finger. Fassbender, he said he cut his finger on what? Brendan, by the garage. He cut his finger on glass. So we have the first iteration. That is, Stephen Avery had cut his finger on glass by the garage. I continue. Fassbender. We had heard that he cut himself during the... Did he say that or not? What did he say cutting himself during it? Brendan. Hurt himself. Fassbender. Did he say where he cut himself? Brendan. No response. Fassbender. On the knife that he used to kill her? Yes or no? Brendan. Yeah. Wiegert. Tell us what he told you exactly. Wiegert. That's okay. Go ahead. Brendan. That. Wiegert. Go ahead. Fassbender. Take a second. It's all right. Wiegert. He said that he cut himself while he was stabbing her. Yes or no? Brendan. Yes. So now we have, in the same interview or interrogation session, a second iteration. That is, Stephen Avery had cut his finger with the knife while he was stabbing Teresa Halbach. I continue. Now this is another interrogation session that took place on February the 27th, 2006, but at the Two Rivers Police Department. Fassbender. Did he tell you that at any time that he had been injured when he had killed Teresa? Brendan. No. That he got a scratch, I think. Fassbender. Where was that scratch? Brendan. Like on his finger? Fassbender. Okay. Wiegert. How did he say he got that scratch? Brendan. That from a fingernail or something. Wiegert. Did he tell you who scratched him? Brendan. Teresa. Wiegert. How did that come about? I mean, did he say, was there a struggle or something, or what did he say? Brendan. Yeah, there was a struggle. Wiegert. Tell me about that. What did he tell you? Brendan. When he was trying to tie her up, she tried to get out and scratch him, trying to get away from him, and she couldn't, so he tied her up and stabbed her. Wiegert. Did he say if she was yelling or screaming or anything? Did he say anything about that? Brendan. No. Wiegert. So he actually showed you the finger? Brendan. Yeah. Wiegert. And which finger was it? Brendan. The pointer finger. Wiegert. Did you see anything on that finger? Brendan. Yeah, a scratch. So we have another iteration. Teresa Halbach had scratched Stephen Avery on the pointer finger with her fingernail. And remember, this is the same day. And he's come up with 3 different versions already. Now, here is the pointer finger. The problem is, Stephen Avery had an injury to his middle finger, not the pointer finger. Okay, now we go to that fateful interrogation session that took place on March the 1st, 2006. Fassbender. Are you sure? Brendan nods yes. Wiegert. Did Steve have any blood on him at that time? Brendan. On his finger? Wiegert. What about on his body and his clothes? Brendan shakes head. No. Not that I know of. Wiegert. Where did you see blood? Brendan. Like right here? Wiegert. Where else? In the garage? Brendan. On the floor? Wiegert. A lot? Brendan. Like drips? Wiegert. Where was it dripping from? Brendan. I don't know. So we have another 4th iteration, and that Stephen Avery had blood on his finger. I continue. Fassbender. Any time, what time during this whole thing did you get hurt? Brendan shakes head. No. Fassbender. Or did he get hurt or injured? Brendan, while we were moving the car or something? Wiegert, any time during this, did he get injured? Brendan, oh, just that scratch, that's all I know. Wiegert, what scratch? Brendan, on his finger. Wiegert, which finger was it on? Do you remember? Brendan, probably this one. Fassbender, was it bleeding? Brendan, it was just bleeding a little bit. Wiegert, how did he get that scratch? Brendan, probably when he was under the hood. So we now have a fifth iteration, and that Stephen Avery had scratched his finger while being under the hood of the Toyota RAV4. Now, this series of interrogations was very important because based on what Brendan was saying, the actual Toyota RAV4 was re-examined by both Hawkins and Tyson on April the 3rd, 2006, and this was all based on the information that was so-called provided by Brendan Dassey. Further swabs were taken from the RAV4, and lo and behold, we have hood latch sweat DNA, which was found to be from Stephen. Okay, now I continue. Fassbender, was Stephen bleeding? Brendan, on his finger, that's it. Fassbender, did Stephen know he was bleeding? Brendan, yeah. Fassbender, did he make any comments about that? Brendan, well, he just went in the bathroom. He got a band-aid when he went in to get the bleach. Fassbender, what did Stephen say he was going to do with her car? Brendan, that he was going to crush it? Fassbender, did he say when he was going to try and do that? Brendan shakes head, no. He said he woulda. Actually, the sooner he said, the sooner the better. So now we have another iteration. Stephen Avery got a band-aid for his bleeding finger. Okay, and in the final interrogation session, which took place on May the 13th, 2006, Brendan Dassey was already arrested. I quote, Fassbender, what about any injuries to Stephen? Again, the hallmarks are what matter here. Did Stephen hurt himself? Brendan, well, there was a scratch on his finger. Fassbender, was it bleeding? Brendan, yeah. Fassbender, when did you first notice that scratch bleeding? Brendan, when I was over there the first time. So now we have another iteration in that Stephen Avery was bleeding from his finger when Brendan went over to his trailer or garage for the very first time. Okay, now we got to understand that Stephen Avery actually was actively bleeding. But what did Stephen actually say about this? And this was a statement in one of Kathleen Zellner's motion. And I quote, this is from Stephen. On the evening of November the 3rd, 2005, after I left my mother's place, I stopped at my sister Barb Dassey Yunder's property and broke open a cut on the outside of the middle finger of my right hand as I was attempting to unhitch her trailer for her. I went into my Pontiac, parked on my driveway, to grab my phone charger. I dripped blood in my Pontiac on the gear shift and other places. Anyone who looked through the windows of my Pontiac could have seen the blood on the gear shift and known there was a cut on my hand. I left my Pontiac unlocked. And as you can see, Stephen Avery's Pontiac Grand Am that had his blood in it was actually seized at Crivets on Sunday, November the 6th. and it was towed away to the Marinette County Sheriff's Department impound. So let's have a close look at the blood that was inside Stephen Avery's Pontiac Grand Am, and you can clearly see here in the squares the presence of blood, and you can see red blood that has been deposited on the gear shift, the gear lever, and blood droplets on the console. So Cherie Cohane had obtained swabs from the Pontiac Grand Am, and these were items B1, B3, B4 and B5. When they were analysed, they contained the full genomic DNA profile from Stephen Avery. Now, Mr. Stolke was questioned about this at the Stephen Avery trial. Question: do the blood stain patterns that you observed in this 1993 Grand Am, are they consistent with the operation of this Grand Am by a person who was actively bleeding? Answer: yes, they are. Okay, now Stephen Avery continued his statement to Kathleen Zellner. Prior to leaving for Menards, I returned to my trailer to put tape on my bleeding finger. I entered my trailer through the south door because it was the closest to the bathroom. I did not lock the south door of my trailer after I entered through it. A large amount of blood dripped onto the rim and sink and the floor of the bathroom. I did not wash away or wipe up because Chuck, that's Stephen's brother, was waiting for me to go to Menards in Manitowoc with him. I think I left somewhere between 7:15 and 7:30 p.m. I quickly wrapped my finger in duct tape and left the trailer to meet Chuck. I left through the front door of my trailer. Now, he was telling the truth because later on photographs were taken, and you can clearly see here a photo showing Stephen Avery's blood on the bathroom floor. Now, a report was written on the 5th of November 2005 by Bill Tyson, and this report was written at the same day, or the activity of that report occurred on the same day that the RAV4 was found on the Avery salvage yard. And have a look at the individuals that went inside Stephen Avery's trailer. We have Bill Tyson, Remaker, Lenk and Colburn. Remaker, Lenk and Colburn should not have entered Steve Avery's trailer, especially since Steve Avery at the time had a $36 million civil lawsuit with Manitowoc. Now note, photographs were taken of bloodstains, and Detective Remaker had collected that bloodstain, and he also did a so-called control swab around where that bloodstain was. Now remember, this took place on the same day that the RAV4 was found in the salvage. So let's summarize this and ask the simple question: did Stephen Avery have an actively bleeding finger on Monday, the 31st of October 2005, the day that Teresa Hallbach went missing? So, according to Brendan Dassey, and remember, he underwent many interrogation sessions with investigators Fassbender and Wiegert. So, according to Brendan Dassey, Stephen Avery had cut his finger on glass by the garage. Stephen Avery had cut his finger with the knife while he was stabbing Teresa Hallbach. Teresa Hallbach had scratched Stephen Avery on the pointer finger, remembering, of course, that the wound to Stephen's finger was the middle finger. With her fingernail, Stephen Avery had blood on his finger, so this is a fairly nondescript description of an injury to Stephen's finger. Stephen Avery had scratched his finger while under the hood of the Toyota RAV4, and that's rather interesting because when investigators checked under the hood of the RAV4, there was no blood to be found at all. Stephen Avery had got a band-aid for his bleeding finger, and if that was the case and he has a band-aid on his finger, then how does one account for the blood in the RAV4? And Stephen Avery was bleeding from his finger when Brendan went over to his trailer or garage for the very first time. So does that mean that Stephen Avery was actively bleeding for several hours before he went inside the RAV4? It makes no sense. So looking at all these statements, I conclude that there's no clear evidence that Stephen Avery's finger was bleeding on the 31st of October 2005 because Brendan Dassey was inconsistent and contradictory in his recollections. And one has to ask, was he just remembering the wound to Stephen's finger after the 31st of October? And if you look at his responses, it appears that Brendan was simply guessing. Now, why did the state call up Brendan to testify against Stephen? Was it because the state knew that Brendan was an unreliable witness? Now, we know that Stephen Avery was actively bleeding, but on the 3rd of November 2005. And don't forget, Brendan Dassey and his brother Blaine were in Stephen's Grand Dam that had Stephen's blood in it. That was at Crivets. Was Brendan simply recalling this event? Now, let's have a close look at the blood stain in the Toyota RAV4. Now, it's important to note here that no blood was noted on the steering wheel, the gear shift lever, and you can see that here in the red square, the handbrake lever, the exterior door handles, the interior door handles, the rear cargo door latch, which I discussed in a previous video, the hood lock release lever, the hood latch, the hood supporting rod, the battery cables and terminals, the number plates, and the RAV4 spare key. And this, you have to ask the question, if there's blood inside the RAV4, is this a special case of selective active bleeding? Why wasn't Steve Avery leaving blood on all these other items if he was actively bleeding? It makes no sense. Alright, now Mr. Groffey was questioned about this particular stain known as item A8. This is the blood stain that was near the ignition. I quote, question, Mr. Groffey, I would like to ask you, is there anything about this photograph that you did any further processing of this vehicle with? Answer, yes. The area that shows the red stain, I did a presumptive test on that area. Question, and what is a presumptive test? Answer, this is a presumptive test for the presence of blood. It's known as phenolphthalein. Question, could you describe a little more for the jurors just how that stain appeared to you? Answer, it was a reddish colour stain on the dash. Question, what did the presumptive test for blood? Yes, I did. Question, I'm sorry, sir. What were the results for that? Answer, it was positive. So that means that Mr. Groffey took a swab and he swabbed the stain and he checked it for the presence of blood. But wait a minute. Have a look when Culhane was questioned about the very same stain in the Stephen Avery trial? Answer: it's my item designation A8, and it has a sample that I recovered from this reddish brown stain here right by the ignition. Question: did you conduct a presumptive test for blood on that stain? Answer: yes, I did, and it was positive. Question: then after you conducted your presumptive test, what did you do? Answer: I sampled another portion of that stain on another cotton swab, and that's what I retained for my DNA testing. So let's summarize this. That means that both Groffey and Culhane did a presumptive test on blood on item A8. That means that there's a total of 3 cotton swabs, 1 for Groffey, 2 for Culhane, on item A8. Well, every time you take a cotton swab with liquid on it and you dab the stain, the blood stain will become more diluted. So does that explain the smear pattern that we see? Because it is very unusual, the shape of that blood smear. And here's the question: was item A8 actually an in situ photo? That is, was it taken before the swabbing, or was it a photo of after the swabbing? Alright, now we have another mystery. Who opened the door to the Toyota RAV4? And Mr. Groffey was questioned about this in the Stephen Avery trial. I quote: answer: the doors to the vehicle were closed. Question: okay, did you have gloves on as you approached the vehicle? Answer: as I approached the vehicle. Question: yes. Answer: not as I approached the vehicle, no. There's a large area around the vehicle. Question: okay, at some point you touched portions of the vehicle though, right? Answer: that is correct, I did. Question: and before you did that, you put gloves on? Answer: I put a laboratory coat on and gloves. That's correct, sir. Question: okay, and did you, with your gloved hands, try the driver's door handle? Take note. Answer: yes, I did. Question: it was locked or unlocked? Answer: the driver's door was unlocked when I got there. Question: okay, the other doors were locked? Answer: yes, the other doors were locked. Question: and that would be actually 4 more doors, correct, including the rear? Answer: that's correct, 4 doors. So, we've got something very interesting here. Who, in actual fact, opened the driver's side door if all the doors were found locked? And we have evidence because both Fassbender, Ertl, Pam and Nicole Sturm indicated that when the RAV4 was at the salvage yard, all the doors were locked. So how come the driver's side door now was found to be opened? Now remember, they didn't have a key, they couldn't get in at the Avery salvage yard. Lo and behold, when it's being examined by Mr. Groffey, the driver's side door is now unlocked. Alright, now how much blood was actually in the Toyota RAV4? And Special Prosecutor Kratz went over this in the Stephen Avery trial, and it's important we go over it. I quote: when we then talk about the blood and the other stains that are found within the SUV, the other 5 places in the front part, the driver's seat, front console, the ignition area, which is perhaps the most damning of all the DNA that's found, passenger seat, and the CD case. Now, each of these locations Miss Colhane is able to develop a profile on a full 15 out of 15 profile on these bloodstains. So these aren't small bloodstains. These aren't 1 microliter as you heard later in the trial about. These are large bloodstains, a drop. As you heard, 1 droplet of blood is 50 microliters. And so these stains, although we do have a 1 droplet stain of Teresa's, all of these stains are much, much larger than that. So in the front, that is, from the front seats forward, 5 different blood stains left by Mr. Avery in Teresa Halbach's vehicle. Again, we're pointing to one person being responsible for Miss Halbach's death. In the rear, that is, on the rear passenger door, that bloodstain is left. And we hear that it is, in fact, Stephen Avery's again. A perfect match for Stephen Avery. What Ken Kratz was trying to say was that in the Toyota RAV4, there were 6 droplets of blood. Now, let's have a look at this. 1 drop of blood is approximately 50 microliters. Now, just to let you know that 1 microliter is 1 in a millionth of a liter. It's an extremely small volume. Now, 6 spots or drops of blood were recovered in the RAV4. That totals around 300 microliters. And for argument's sake, let's double that. Let's double the volume to account for possible errors in volume estimation. So therefore, we're looking at a total of around about 600 microliters of Stephen Avery's blood that was in the Toyota RAV4. Now, what does 600 microliters look like? Well, if you have a look at this very small tube, it's known as an Eppendorf tube. It can take a maximum of 1.5 mils of fluid. And I've indicated on the side of the tube where 300 microliters and where 600 microliters will be. And as you can see, you only require a very small amount of blood to place in the RAV4, either through Stephen Avery's finger or from a blood vial. You don't need a huge amount of blood. All right, now here's the key question. Can you really tell the difference? And Attorney Buting in the Stephen Avery trial said the following. So really, we have this and this, which Mr. Stalky says is consistent with active bleeding. It is also consistent with active planting. So what Attorney Buting was talking about was, okay, let's have a look at this blood stain. The state is saying that that blood stain near the ignition was a result of active bleeding. But you can potentially also get exactly the same blood stain by active planting. And Attorney Buting continued and said, you are going to be shining your flashlight right there to see if maybe the key is in the ignition. No one sees this rather peculiar looking blood stain that looks sort of like you might get if you take a Q-tip and dab it. Doesn't look consistent with the state's theory, as I understand it. So my original question is, can you really tell the difference between a blood stain that's there through active bleeding or active planting? You can't. You cannot tell the difference. Now, let's finish the presentation by having a look at Stephen Avery's 1996 blood vial. When Buting went to examine the container that had the blood vial, this is what he found. He found that the blood vial was present in a polystyrene box. And what he noted was the evidence tape had been cut. It had been sliced through. Now that's fine. Normally when you take a piece of evidence out, you have to cut the evidence tape, but when you put the piece of evidence back, you place a fresh piece of evidence tape, you sign it, you date it. So when he found the polystyrene box, the evidence tape had been cut. Someone clearly had been in there. Inside the polystyrene container was a vial containing Stephen Avery's blood. And what was noted was on the lip, on the inside lip of the blood vial, you can see a ring of blood that's present around the lip. Now this clearly indicates that there's something gone wrong because the blood is under vacuum. So that means that air must have been introduced inside this tube, or that the cap was disturbed in some manner to allow a bit of air inside the blood vial, because the blood has started to creep inside the lip. That should not take place. And you note here a tiny pinprick on the purple cover. Now I want to point out that that is entirely normal. Nothing nefarious about that. That's the pinprick that's used to place the blood inside the tube. And just to remind you, you only require a very small amount of blood if you're going to take blood from this blood vial. Between 300 to 600 microliters, and no one is going to notice that if it indeed was removed from the blood vial. Now, was the state concerned about this discovery? Absolutely it was. And let me quote here. Ken Kratz put in the following motion, and I'll read it to you. Notice of motion and motion to exclude blood vial evidence, or in the alternative, to analyze the vial of blood. So clearly the state wanted to get on the front foot and suppress that evidence, or potentially to test that blood. So here we have a picture of attorney Norm Garn having a look at the blood vial. And I would say that when he had discovered this, he would have turned white as a ghost. So the FBI actually tested the blood swabs that were taken from the Toyota RAV4, and they had failed to detect EDTA. Now, the FBI needed to devise a brand new test to detect that EDTA. And apparently they did that in record speed, because normally the FBI doesn't do this test any further. Now, the fact that they failed to detect EDTA, did that actually rule out possible planting? And remember, the FBI can only test what has been sent to them. And I'd like to tell you guys that in my next presentation, I will be looking at the FBI and the tests that they conducted to look at the presence of EDTA. All right, thank you guys. That is the end of my presentation, and I've used the following references, which of course you can check up if you'd like to do any further reading. And just to let you know that we're always still thinking about Stephen and Brendan, and we hope that videos like this can shed more light and more information to the general public.